Hi friends, my name's Chris, and today we finish Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy. We'll be covering books 4 and 5 today, which generally go over the problem of evil, why do bad things happen to the good, and the issue of foreknowledge, or how can we preserve free will if it's the case that God knows and sees everything. I hope you guys enjoy the discussion. And so going back, I guess, a little bit to books 1 to 3, the way this story has unfolded a little bit. The story's written in like a first person point of view, and it's Boethius who is approached by this like lady philosophy, this the embodiment of like philosophy essentially. I think it's just like a metaphorical figure that comes down and tries to console him and remind him of what it means to be a philosopher and what it means to kind of live this type of life. And so it starts off with Lady Philosophy coming down into his cell and diagnosing him a little bit in the way a physician would diagnose a sick patient. Boethius is really distraught at this point because he he sees himself as a really good person. He's done all the right things, um, but for some reason or another, things that are out of his, like for reasons out of his control completely, he was stripped from all of that, from all of his happiness. He was stripped from his family, from his title, his reputation, his money, everything. He had it taken away. So he's asking Lady Philosophy, well, why do these bad things happen to good people? I thought I was a good person. I spent my life trying to be virtuous. Um, Spent my life trying to live alongside these Stoic and Greek principles. Why am I being punished for this? And then in book 2, Lady Philosophy introduces this idea of fortune. And so Fortuna was a Roman goddess, and Fortuna, she is randomness basically. Lady Philosophy was trying to remind or teach Boethius here that all the things you thought were in your control and you thought thought were yours really weren't. All of these things, like the money, like your kids, your wife, love, happiness, all of these things that you thought you had and you thought you were yours, really they were just something that was on loan by this goddess. She was kind of just randomly playing dice, and one day she decided to take all of these things away from you, to condemn you, I guess. So it's not that you lost everything, it's that you thought you had things that weren't really yours. And so then Boethius starts asking, well, how can I achieve happiness? If it's not through wealth, if it's not through my family, if it's not through the love that people can give me or my reputation or my career, how am I supposed to find happiness? And Lady Philosophy starts to teach him, well, let's let's look at all of these things that were bringing you happiness and let's kind of poke some holes in it. And I'm going to show you that these things cannot be happiness because happiness should not be something that's divisible. And so they, in the third book, they start to kind of like reconceive of what it means to be happiness, reconceive of what's in our control and how happiness should only come from things that are in our control. And then the concept of the inner citadel kind of comes up. The inner citadel and reason, there are these things that cannot be touched by fortune, cannot be touched by chance, and they're completely ours. Um, Things like our capacity to reason, our capacity to think, our phenomenal experiences, all of these things cannot be taken and given by Lady Fortune. Only worldly possessions, only things like money and family and reputation can be taken by Lady Philosophy. And so happiness needs to be something that cannot be taken away. It needs to be something that is not divisible. And it needs to be something that comes from this inner citadel or from reason alone. It must be complete, let's say, or it must have this like metaphysical characteristic. And so all of that brings us to where we are now, books 4 and 5. And there's two big problems that come up in these books. And they are the problem of evil, or the existence of evil, and the issue of free will. And so the problem of evil, really simply or generally, this is taken from Epicurus. And his problem of evil was essentially, if God is all good, um, and he governs all things, and he's all powerful, how can there still exist evil? And furthermore, if um, if it's the case that God is good, then why does it seem to be the case that all of the wicked people in the world end up being the most powerful? How come it's King Theodoric, the man who's paranoid and power hungry? How come it's him that seems to have all the power? Him that has the armies at his disposal and the ability to kind of like put people in jail, however he sees fit. There seems to be like a big injustice here. The virtuous people, the virtuous men, they end up locked up in jail, and then the wicked end up with all the power. Um, and this kind of threatens this idea of providence that the Christians are kind of endorsing at this point. The Christians have this idea of providence, of like this worldly cosmic order that God kind of like lays out in front of us. How come providence is allowing for all of these wicked men to rise to power, and all of these virtuous men to be condemned and punished? And so that's the first problem that Boethius is starting to ask here. The next problem in Book 5 is that of freedom. Well, if there is this conception of providence, if God is kind of like an all-knower, he knows everything and he can see everything, then is there any wiggle room for free will? Can we actually be free if God knows what we're going to be doing, if he knows everything? And so it's these two problems that he's trying to tackle in these books. And so I guess starting off with why there's evil, or why there's wicked people. And this is Lady Philosophy's idea or argument, her thesis. She thinks that all humans universally seek happiness. We all want to be happy. It's this type of like innate drive that we have in us. And that true happiness is the highest type of good. However, happiness oftentimes gets mixed up and people get it confused. People get it confused with things like money, with things like relationships, with things like family, with things like career. That's not what happiness needs to be or is. Happiness for Lady Philosophy needs to be something that comes from within, from our inner citadel, and that's tied to reason. And so all humans are looking for happiness. Very often they get lost. And they start to find happiness in things that, they're false goods, they're false happinesses. And what we need to kind of look for is the higher goods, or the highest goods. And so how do we do this? Well, the only way to attain this type of highest good, this type of true happiness, is through the cultivation of virtues. And so Boethius, obviously, is very studied on Greek philosophy, and this is Aristotle and Plato's whole deal. They cared about the virtues, about cultivating the virtues, these things that are our character and within us, and end up being kind of like ours, untouchable by fortune. And so it's only through the cultivation of these virtues, and through strong virtues, that we can say that we are genuinely and truly happy. And so the conclusion then here ends up being that all of the wicked, King Theodoric, all of the powerful people, really, they didn't have real power. They didn't have real happiness because they lacked virtues. And there you can see, he says, so that the good are seen to be powerful and the wicked the weak. Now all of a sudden he's trying to like reconceive, or Lady Philosophy and Boethius, they're trying to like understand what it means to be powerful. For the longest time, they were thinking that power means the ability to put someone in jail. To be powerful means to have the armies at your disposal, or to have lots of money, or to have, I don't know, lots of reputation, or family, or loved ones. All of these worldly happinesses were kind of feeding into the power that one has, and now Lady Philosophy is telling Boethius that this is the wrong way to understand of power. Virtue is the power comes from virtue, and the wicked do not possess this virtue. So really, it's you, Boethius, who are the most powerful, despite being in this jail cell, despite no longer having your family or your kids or your job. It's you who's powerful. And so another kind of premise or things that they establish that I guess we can like debate about or talk about is this idea that it's in our nature to be rational. It's in our nature to seek the good. Um, and we can talk about like the tabula rasa, or just like what is innate to being human? What does it mean to be human? And so Lady Philosophy, she thinks that what it means to be human is to possess a capacity to reason. It's this rational nature in us that is what makes us human. And so I don't know if I fully agree with this, but to some extent, yes, that seems right. And she thinks that this innate ability to reason inherently seeks the good. It's just like a feature of our rationality, a feature of our reason to kind of try and find the good. It oftentimes gets that wrong, though, obviously, because we start looking for things like money or reputation or relationships. When those things are not the highest good are the virtues. And so essentially what evil is, it's the crumbling of our reason, or the crumbling of our human nature. If power is the capacity to achieve the highest good, then goodness is the defining characteristic of human existence. We are inherently good. And then there's two ideas, I guess, that he talks about. That of privation and that of, let's call it like disorientation. And so he thinks that evil is a type of privation. It's a type of absence of something. To abandon goodness is to abandon your humanity. Humans are not innately evil or innately cruel. We are innately good. So once you start doing evil things, or the evil person or the wicked person, they are no longer a person. They're losing the personhood. They're losing their human nature. It's not just the wicked do not merely act badly. They're just like destroying themselves spiritually and ontologically. They're kind of like their sense of self is crumbling. Their humanity is crumbling. They're no longer a human. They're some sort of like a beast. They're this type of like animal. They're like regressing almost. Every time you engage in something evil, that's what's happening. And that's this descent to the bestial. So stripped of rational orientation, once we start to lose this capacity to reason and we start acting evilly, and we start kind of being driven by our passions or by worldly passions, things like money, power, and so on, then we degenerate a little bit. We go from human to beast. And she says, or he says, uh, wherefore it comes to pass that he who leaves aside goodness ceases to be a man. And since he cannot pass to the divine state, he turns into a beast, the violent spoiler of other men's goods. You will liken to the wolf, the cheating, muttering rogue to the fox, the fierce and passionate to the hound. Once we start to let go of our capacity to reason, once we stop cultivating our virtues and engaging in these evil actions, we regress into these beasts, and we're no longer human. And then he starts to talk about why we must punish people, what punishment kind of is. He thinks that vice, engaging in vice, whatever that is, whether it's acting immorally or lying or anything like that, in itself, it's hurting you. In itself, it's a penalty. In itself, it's a punishment. Since happiness can only come from true goodness, from true reason, from pure reason, from pure human nature, vice inflicts a type of like internal and self-directed misery. regardless of what's going on in the outside world, regardless if your vices are allowing you to accumulate more money or allowing you to, uh, I don't know, indulge in more worldly pleasures, these vices are kind of like chipping away at you spiritually. They're chipping away at your humanity. And so punishment is the remedy. Um, Whether that be legal or divine even. It's a type of medicine. It cures this spiritual illness, and addresses the spiritual disease, the spiritual aspect of vice. Lastly, it kind of says that impunity ends up being the worst type of fate that anyone could kind of like be presented with. To commit evil and to escape punishment. So to do something that's wrong and to not be punished for that wrongness, it's like being sick and not getting the medicine you need. You're gonna spiral spiritually and you're gonna degrade and die. If you don't treat a disease, if your immune system doesn't attack the pathogens, then you die. And this is what's happening with those who do wrong and go unpunished. And so the unpunished tyrant, he is the most wretched of all humans. Perhaps Theodoric, the Ostrogoth king, he is wretched. And so he says as well, he says, the wicked are much more unhappy when they evade punishment than when they suffer the penalties of justice. Impunity adds a further evil to their guilt. So we need this punishment. Punishment heals us and remedies us. And so we should look at these wicked men or wicked people not with anger, but with pity. Why? Because their disease is so serious. These vices have kind of like ravaged the soul so intensely that to be angry at them seems like a little bit incoherent. It's like seeing like a dead man on the floor and then hating them, or seeing someone that's suffering and then hating them. He sees all of the wicked as just like suffering immensely spiritually. They're ontologically becoming less human. He thinks that the wicked end up suffering from an affliction far worse than any type of physical ailment, from any type of incarceration, or from any type of worldly pain. So we need to pity the wicked as opposed to hate the wicked. In the same way that weakness might be a disease of the body, vice is a disease of the mind, or of the spirit, or of reason. And then I guess into like moving into book 5, we get these we get a bit of a discussion on providence and fate. And honestly, like I didn't really know I forgot about the difference. I probably learned this at some point, but I totally forgot about the difference of these two things. And providence and fate, they're kind of like operating on different planes, I guess. Providence is Christian, but I guess theological as well. And it's this idea that it is like this type of like eternal world map, a complete blueprint of the universe. It's simple, unchanging, unmoving. The singular plan that God has, it's God's plan. Providence is the divine reason itself, seated in the supreme being. It's coming from God, coming from the divine. Fate, on the other hand, it's kind of operating on a lower plane. It's operating at the human level, at the worldly level. And I guess you can kind of think about this. This is interesting because while Boethius was really studied on Greek philosophy, and the Greeks were predominantly pagan, it's a very Christian idea to have this view of providence. The Greeks had this idea of fate, and it was worldly, and it was human. Humans were at the whims of fate. But providence, that goes beyond human now. That goes metaphysical. And it's this the divine reason itself. So fate is something that occurs within within our world, within what we see. It unfolds through time. Um, so it has like this temporal component to it, whereas providence, it's eternal. It's infinite. It doesn't have any type of like temporal component to it. And so it's almost like the analogy I guess you can have here, and he brings up, is that the providence is like the blueprint, and then the physical construction, or like the unfolding of that blueprint, the actual building of that building, that's closer to fate. Everything that's human and worldly is subject to fate. And so that's the distinction that we need to kind of keep in mind when trying to answer why good people suffer. And so this is essentially just the problem of evil. Why is there bad if God is good? And so we need this distinction between providence and faith to understand that. Lady Philosophy at this point tries to explain to Boethius that fortune is not bad or good, but can always be conceived of as, no, let me reword that. Fortune is always good. You just need to look at it the right way. And so, like, before we were saying, well, how fortune just takes and gives, like, willy-nilly. It takes away your families, or it takes away your wealth, or your job, or whatever. And then sometimes it'll give you family, or give you wealth, or give you reputation, and all that type of... It just kind of gives and takes at its own whim. How can when it takes away things from you, how can that be good? And so, Lady Philosophy reasons here that it can be good because it's exercising your virtues. Like, see, Boethius, the fact that you are in this cell now, and that you're having to philosophize, and then you're having to kind of like face life and face the unfortunate situation of the wicked being in control and all this type of stuff. This is exercising your virtues, and remember, your virtues are what will lead to happiness. So even things that seem wrong or bad, even unfortunate events really are fortunate because they're exercising your virtues, and they're allowing you to become a happier person. They're strengthening you through trial, kind of like the story of Hercules. It's only through trial and through practice and exercise that you're going to get stronger. And this is a type of like spiritual exercise, I guess, going through hardship and adversity. Adversity is good. It makes you more virtuous. And so, yeah, they say, for all fortune which seems difficult either exercises virtue or corrects or punishes vice, and so everything is good. Every type of random event can be conceived of as good because it either can give you more, or it can exercise your virtues, which will make you more happy. And so the paths, they talk about like the paths that we take for kind of like arriving to our fate. And the three paths, or there's kind of like three steps to these paths, or this is, I guess, like the diagram of how I'm kind of like picturing it. To be virtuous leads to being happy, which leads to true power. To engage in vice leads to a spiritual misery, which leads to a type of weakness. And while the wicked might seem very powerful because they have armies at their disposal and they can throw you in jail however much they want, this isn't true power. True power comes from happiness and virtue. And so it rests on you to make your fortune what you will. Everything that fortune throws at you, it's up to you to turn that into like to feed that into your virtue, or to use that adversity as strengthening. And so it either can correct or punish vice, and so it's all good at the end of the day. And now, at this point, Boethius starts to ask, well, does chance really exist? Does randomness really exist? Is this fortuna a true randomness? And Lady Philosophy says that nothing happens without a cause. And at face value, if nothing can happen without a cause, then it seems like free will is going to be threatened a little bit. If nothing is truly random, then everything is deterministic. If everything's deterministic, uh-oh, free will's in trouble. And so the example they give of how there isn't any randomness, but we can still preserve free will, is with this example of like a man digging in a field. So like imagine that some guy at one point buried some gold or buried a treasure, hundreds of years pass, and then a man is farming or digging around that same field, and they come across this gold, come across this treasure. It seems like chance, but really there was a long sequence of there was a long purposeful causal chain that led to that man finding that gold. There's explanations that we can give. He moved to that area that day. He had a lot of energy, so he could walk to a certain place in the field. He had the right tools that he bought. Then you can build up the whole story and build up this causal chain that perfectly explains this apparent randomness. And so we may define chance as unexpected results, but these unexpected results always flow from a real causal chain, and they all have some sort of definite end. Okay, well, how can it be the case though that there's free will if everything adheres to the causal chain? And I think that's, to answer that the way Boethius does at least, is in saying that we agreed earlier that it is in our nature to possess reason. Humans are innately rational. And in order for us to be rational, it needs to be the case that we have freedom. You can't have rationality without freedom. So how do we square having rationality and everything having antecedent causes that explain everything perfectly? And so what Lady Philosophy ends up saying is that she says, to possess rationality means to possess the ability to deliberate between choices, to choose between A or B. And this means evaluating things and kind of, I guess, just like thinking about things and then choosing them. And so a being that can't reason, or a being that can reason but cannot end up choosing or deliberating, is kind of like a contradiction, since it's in our nature to be rational. And this brings us to the thing you're probably thinking about now, this foreknowledge issue, or the foreknowledge problem. Essentially, the foreknowledge problem is, well, how do we have free will if God knows everything we're going to do? If God can see divine providence and see everything that's going to unfold and exactly how it's going to unfold, he has this blueprint of the universe, how can we truly be free? And so essentially, kind of like broken down or formalized, the foreknowledge paradox is that God knows all future events with absolute certainty and cannot be mistaken. Therefore, God foresees and must inevitably come to pass exactly as seen. And if an event must inevitably happen, it happens by necessity and not by our choice, which is embedded in reason. And if that's the case, then all of a sudden free will is undermined. And any type of moral accountability, any type of wrongdoing you engage in, it's voided. If God foresees all things and cannot be mistaken, that which his providence has foreseen must needs happen. And the solution is a pretty interesting one, I think. It rests on the nature of time, or how time operates on the worldly level and on the divine level. And so time is what Boethius defines time as, and what a lot of Greek philosophers will kind of like debate on. But what he sees time as is this type of successive progression, one thing after another. And creatures in time move from the past, which is gone, which doesn't exist anymore, through the present, which is like fleeting and you can't really grab onto, and into the future, which does not yet exist. A pretty standard conception of time. The past doesn't exist, the present is fleeting, the future also doesn't exist yet. And so even if time were infinite, it would still be trapped in this succession. There would still be this like before, now, and after. The thing is, though, that God doesn't operate on this before, now, after principle, or like he doesn't exist in this like temporal plane the way humans do. He exists in eternity, at all moments, at the same time. And I guess like in this sense, it's kind of like a Augustinian like presentism that he's endorsing. Um, God exists in the past, the future, and the present, or in our past, future, and present, but in its present solely, or in our eternity. God is existing at the same time and in the same way in the past as he is right now, as he will be in the future. And so eternity then, it's this type of like complete and simultaneous possession of endless life. And so he thinks that this foreknowledge problem can be solved a little bit by looking at God and divine providence in terms of the eternal, as opposed to in terms of this human before, now, after conception of time. And so the trick, I guess, or like the philosophical move that's being made by Lady Philosophy here, or I guess by Boethius, is that while God can see and know everything, it's not the case that he causes everything. And we need this causation to be preserved because since humans are innately rational, and we must have a capacity to deliberate and to choose between things, we can still cause things voluntarily because we have that capacity. And God can see everything that's happening, but not cause our actions, like preserving free will in that way. And so, like, the example is, I guess, like when you see a person walking, um, just because you see that they're walking, and just because you know certainly that they're walking, doesn't mean that you're making them walk. You're just an observer, you're just observing, and that's what God is doing. He knows exactly everything that's going to happen because he has this like third person point of view into the past, present, into our past, present, and future, and all of our actions. He knows exactly what we're going to do, but we still have the ability to choose whether to walk or not. The cause of what he sees is up to us. And this is, I guess, like what I was trying to say. It's this eternal present. He sees our future as his present. He sees our past as his present. And this eternal observation of everything doesn't absolve or doesn't take away our free will in any way. We can preserve our free will. He's just an observer. He's just seeing. He's not causing. And so I guess the key takeaways that like philosophy kind of took from this, or at least that I kind of read in this like little review, was that, well, firstly, what Boethius does in books 4 and 5 is that he's trying to preserve God's goodness and his justice in the face of all of the evil in the world and in the face of all of the wicked. And he's redefining terms constitutive of human existence. Power is no longer having armies at your disposal or a big bank account. It is grounded in virtue. Punishment is not seen as this type of, as revenge or as this like retribution or this slap on the wrist. It's really just medicine that's healing your soul. And time is a bit of an illusion. At least our sense of time is a little bit of an illusion. What it is this eternal present that can only be observed by God, and which we're forced to kind of like exist through or in. And I guess, yeah, this gets into like different theories of time, and how we should conceive of time, and not everyone agrees with how we should conceive of time. But this is how Boethius is agreeing, or is seeing time to be. And so he says, in the final words, the last kind of bits in this book, it's that great is the necessity of righteousness laid upon you, if you will not hide it from yourself, seeing that all your actions are done before the eyes of a judge who sees all things, or God. And then I guess some two more like interesting, or I guess philosophical points that we can get back to that we need to thank Boethius for is his hierarchy of cognition, which we still kind of like use nowadays, and the distinction between the kinds of necessities that exist. And I guess this is more like of a technical difference. Briefly going over this like hierarchy of cognition, Boethius sees intelligence or like cognition as something that's a little bit like scaffolded in the universe. At the very bottom and in the most primitive and proto-simple sense, there is sense. So animals are able to sense things and perceive things like smelling and seeing and whatever. And this is to some extent cognitive. It's responding to the environment. Higher order animals that can be creative and remember and kind of like do hypotheticals and solve problems and whatever. They have this capacity to imagine, or imagination. That's perceiving without the thing itself being there. Humans, you and me, we have a capacity to reason. That's completely in our nature. And it kind of sets us aside from the other animals. But humans don't really possess absolute or true intelligence. That's reserved for God and God alone. This unified understanding of the world that's out of our reach. And even the things that we can kind of like gain knowledge about and become intelligent about, we can only get there through methodical and systematic reasoning. That's our only tool, really, to get at knowledge. Whereas God has probably infinite other tools to get to that knowledge and to have that knowledge. And then the last, I guess, little thing is the kinds of necessities. Or, I guess, in philosophy, the word necessity, it means something slightly different than just like in normal language. And I guess this is kind of like an important distinction that Boethius is making at the time, which he does to kind of resolve the foreknowledge issue, or the foreknowledge paradox. And he distinguishes between two different types of necessities, of things that must happen. And this distinction proves that God's infallible sight does not impose on any type of causation. So first off, there's simple necessity. And this is beyond control and choice. It's just like, it is the case that X. It's necessarily the case that this book is black. I can't like wish it to be white and then it turns white all of a sudden, or I can't imagine it really hard and then it turns into something else. It just is the case that this book is black, in the same way that you and I are mortal. There's nothing we can do about it. Men are mortal. And that's that end of discussion. Conditional necessity is something a little bit different, and this is what preserves this is what preserves foreknowledge. It's something that's necessary only upon the condition of being known or observed. So take the walking man example. If you see a walking man, it's necessary that he's walking. Yes, it is the case that he is walking. It cannot be otherwise unless you're blind or you're hallucinating or something. But because you see him, it's not causing him to do anything. It's not causing him to walk. You're just an observer. And his free choice to walk is what's causing your seeing. And so this is all because of prior, voluntary, free will driven choices. God's eternal knowledge imposes only conditional necessity onto our actions, not simple necessities onto our actions, because he sees them as happening in his eternal third point of view present. It's necessary that all of them occur, but this necessity arises from his perfect sight, not from a strict, simple necessity. But that's where Boethius ends off his consolation. And after writing this, I think after a couple months, I think it's unknown exactly when, but he is unfortunately tortured and then bludgeoned to death. It's not exactly clear or known exactly how he was killed, but it was not a nice, clean execution. Um, and so that was Boethius's consolation of philosophy.